Deepwoken has a rather unique speedrunning history. Its speedrunning community quite honestly shouldn't even exist. Despite this, a small yet dedicated group of individuals have made it their personal mission to beat the final dungeon as fast as humanly possible. In spite of all the odds, and even a clear lack of any way to actually speedrun the game, Deepwoken has resulted in one of the most complex and technical speedruns out there, with runners being able to express their creativity in ways that other categories simply don't allow, and how runners fought against the game, the developers, and each other to take back the record again and again. This is the history of Deepwoken's Layer 2 Chaser% speedruns, Always AFK's final video.
Act 1. Early Days and Foundation.
In the beginning of Deepwoken's history, there seemed to be no clear way to even speedrun the game. As an MMORPG, it had no real end goal other than maybe reaching maximum level. And although some players tried speedrunning reaching 100 stats or level 30, they never really gained traction in the community. Deepwoken also had a lot of roguelike elements, meaning that starting from a fresh character slot is difficult with permanent unlocks and New Game Plus systems, which made it harder for new players to enter the game, much less create a speedrunning scene. And that's kind of how things were for the first year of the game, until the first major content update released. It was known as Verse 2, and with it came the final boss and dungeon of the game. This became a clear target for Always AFK, one of the only people who had tried speedrunning Deepwoken before the update. He found a way to clear the first boss of the dungeon, Chaser, in 17 minutes and 45 seconds from a new character, by picking a starting origin that placed him closer to a shrine that would level him up 3 times, quickly granting him the level requirement to enter the dungeon, then combat logging to lose both of his lives and be taken to the depths, where he could jump into the void to enter the first floor of the new dungeon to defeat Chaser. It was enough to convince Speedrun.com moderators to add Deepwoken as an official game on their website. Just barely though. The internal council of Roblox moderators actually all voted against Deepwoken becoming a speedrunnable game due to the roguelike elements I mentioned earlier, and numerous New Game Plus mechanics like the ecosystem. However, they were overruled by the head administrator due to Deepwoken's popularity in general. And while this run was influential, it is not the category we are going to cover in this video. Instead, we will be going over the Chaser% any power category. Instead of timing the run from when the character is created, a vast majority of speedrunners decided to time themselves from the beginning of the actual dungeon by itself, with a fully completed build rather than a totally new one. This meant that each player attempting a run could have a completely unique build, and with an MMORPG like Deepwoken, that meant options were basically limitless. You could choose from, among other things, 5 attunements which are magic types, hundreds of unique spells or mantras, 3 weapon types with hundreds of unique weapons, 25 weapon enchantments, 3 murmurs, which are small passive buffs, 9 oaths, which are essentially character classes granting the user powerful abilities, only 2 of which are even used for speedrunning, 13 resonances, which are another single powerful active ability the player can unlock, 12 rollable character races with minor stat differences, and hundreds upon hundreds of talents that give the player passive buffs and abilities. I won't cover them all right now, but we will mention the important ones as they appear in the timeline. With thousands upon thousands of unique build possibilities available to the player in a game like Deepwoken, it was plain to see the uniqueness that the speed game had when compared to other popular speed games, where runners are limited to using the same exact character with the same exact abilities. So now there was a clear goal for speedrunners to aim for, and it didn't take long for the first run in the category to emerge. On December 27, 2022, only a couple days after the update, a player named Artem Voronin0 released a video called Layer 2 Speedrun Tactic, showcasing some rudimentary techniques. His build wasn't very specialized, opting for a medium weapon and the strength oath known as Star Kindred, which grants its users stronger air dashes for a minute after using one of its abilities. But quick movement and clever routing allowed him to complete Chaser in 9 minutes and 24 seconds. Let's quickly go over what is required to complete this dungeon. As soon as you spawn into the dungeon, you must grab a key from this cliff here, and then put it in the door. After it slowly opens, you jump off and travel through this lower area. Take a zipline upwards, cross this bridge here, while being slowed by some well-designed wind mechanics. Fight a mini-boss known as the Bonekeeper, activate the generator he was guarding, go back the way you came, clear your body of the deadly parasites, take this path down, go through this cave, talk to the village chief to remove a barrier that lets you progress into the Bounder Nest, run through the nest without dying, Chaser won't spawn unless you trigger the Bounder Nest, make your way through the Chaser's castle, and finally reach Chaser himself, who can be defeated by destroying all of his healing jars in the arena, and then waiting for him to break through the floor and spawn his reward chest to end the timer. I've drawn this route here in Microsoft Paint so you can see the exact path he took in this run. And while it seems slow by today's standards, back then it was impressive for anyone to beat this dungeon, let alone beat it in 9 minutes and 24 seconds. But there was still much that could be improved upon. And it didn't take long for someone to make a specialized build dedicated to beating this dungeon as fast as possible. On January 2nd, 2023, Toupet released their first world record speedrun of Chaser in 8 minutes and 52 seconds. I won't go over the specifics of this run, because he quickly improved upon that time over the course of 8 runs in about a month, leading to his final run on January 27th with a time of 6:54. In this run, he used Star Kindred like the previous record holder, but he found a much faster route that avoided using the zip line to get up to the Bonekeeper. And he made clever use of the terrain to gain speed boost and other abilities that let him bypass wind. Instead of using a medium weapon, he opted for the strongest heavy weapon in the game, the Evan Spear Hand Axe, with the most powerful enchant known as Chilling, which let him kill the Bonekeeper a lot faster. He also used the Ardor Scream ability, which allowed you to spend all your ether in order to gain a 25% damage boost. After activating the generator, instead of backtracking, Toup made a leap of faith across this gap here, which saved a lot of time by allowing him to take an alternate, much quicker route to the village chief by using the zipline. This of course meant he had to get through the one-way door to the cave, but this is easily done by rolling and jumping, which allows you to clip through thin walls like this one. He also took a different route around Chaser's castle, avoiding the long winding passage through the inside by climbing up on the outside, which saved a lot of time. For Toup's actual Chaser fight, he used the Dread Breath mantra to break Chaser's jars on the lower floor by standing in the middle and spinning around quickly, and the upper jars with Brachial Spear. Once all of Chaser's jars were broken and his reward chest spawned, the timer ended. Unfortunately, this would be Toup's last Chaser run, as he decided to focus more on the Ethron category, which is the second boss of the dungeon that you can access after beating Chaser. His record didn't last long though. 2 days later on January 29th, Always AFK began streaming with the goal of taking Toup's record. And with this stream, things were about to get a lot faster. Instead of just using the Evan Spear Hand Axe for extra damage, Always AFK also equipped a Petra's Anchor, a heavy weapon known for its mobility critical attack. He also got lucky with his build and obtained a super rare legendary resonance, Kamui, which in layer 2 serves as an extra powerful dash. This meant he couldn't use portals to skip through the wind like Toup did, since you are only allowed to have one resonance. But that didn't matter, because Always AFK could avoid encountering the wind entirely with the route that he was using. Let's see what Always AFK did differently in his run. First things first, he made use of Gale Breath a lot more than Toup, finding plenty of places to use Gale Leaps near the start of the run. He also broke through the door at the start by using Shoulder Bash, which let him skip the slow door opening animation and saving a couple of seconds. After that, instead of going down to the left like Toup, he went over to the right, using his extra dash to make some huge jumps directly to the back of the Bonekeeper bridge fight. Once he got there, he switched weapons to the stronger Evan Spear Hand Axe, and quickly killed the Bonekeeper. Then, instead of going through the inside of the building that the generator lay on top of, he opted to jump over and around it instead. Next, after talking to the village chief, he does something a bit strange. Instead of going through the cave and spawning the bounders like usual, which is a requirement to spawn Chaser, he instead skips the entire area by going out of bounds. But how is this possible? Well, it's actually quite simple. There is a large hitbox that is placed which triggers the bounder spawning event. However, it is so large that a small portion of it extends to this out of bounds region. By touching the very edge of this hitbox, he can continue this unorthodox route out of bounds. This route spits him out near the top of this cliff, setting him up for multiple jumps on top of the towers that lead up to Chaser. Once he gets to the Chaser fight, he uses Dread Breath and Brachial Spear like Toup, quickly ending the fight with a time of 6 minutes and 29 seconds. One of the unfortunate parts of speedrunning an online game like Deepwoken is that players are constantly subject to updates and patches while being unable to revert to older versions.
Act 2. Divine Intervention.
This means that at any time, the developers can drop an update that completely patches or removes speedrunning tech. This became evident on January 30th, the very next day after Always AFK's world record, when they reworked the Chaser fight completely. Before this update, Chaser was defeated simply by breaking his jars, and he would fall to the floor as soon as all of his jars were broken. But after this rework, they made it so you needed to deal damage to Chaser in order to defeat him. And they added a hefty cooldown to Chaser's vulnerable state, meaning he stayed in the air for much longer even if all of his jars were broken. Considering that he had 25,000 HP, things weren't looking good for the speedrunning community. Since Chaser was a humanoid enemy, damage versus monster armor kits were effective against monsters, but not him, meaning that players had seemingly no way of dealing enough damage to beat him on the same pace as before. This, in combination with Chaser staying in the air much longer than before due to the vulnerable state cooldown, it made it seem like it was the end of Chaser% speedruns. Nearly a month had passed, but that's when something interesting happened. While everyone had given up on Chaser%, one runner showed it was still possible to take the record even further. His name was Ecliptic, and on February 25th, almost a month since Always AFK's last run, he began speedrunning Chaser, and what he did changed everything. His run was completely different. He opted to forego Gale entirely, using Frost Draw instead, and rather than using the enhanced dashes of Star Kindred, he took Jet Striker, the Agility Oath, for traditional mobility mantra slots. Using some new tech with Glacial Arc and Ice Lance to gain immense height, and Ice Skates for insane horizontal mobility, he was able to save almost a minute on the first half of the run alone. He also was the first to discover that talking to the village chief wasn't necessary for spawning Chaser, meaning that he could take a more direct route to the Bounder skip location out of bounds. Once he got to Chaser, it only took 5 cycles with his high DPS build. It turned out that forcing the player to damage Chaser meant that even though they had to wait longer for Chaser to enter his vulnerable state, it was actually faster to kill him by reducing his HP to 0 rather than destroying all the jars. And so the run ended, giving Ecliptic a solid time of 5 minutes and 43 seconds. Needless to say, the race for Chaser World Records was officially back on. Kind of. Record history for this period is a bit muddy. After the Chaser rework, Ecliptic and Always AFK decided to start speedrunning the second boss of the dungeon, Etheron, which made Chaser records kind of an afterthought. For the next few months, Always AFK was speedrunning, but didn't necessarily need a fast Chaser to stay competitive for the Etheron world record. That is, until Always AFK made a new build that changed everything. In Deepwoken, there are 6 magic types. In the past, speedrunners only considered Gale Breath and Frost Draw as viable attunements due to the mobility buffs and mantras that they granted players. However, it is possible to make hybrid attunement builds, but they are incredibly difficult to progress, which made runners hesitant to use them in the past. Always AFK was the first to start running with a hybrid attunement build. However, he didn't make a hybrid Gale and Frost build. Instead, he made a hybrid Gale and Thunder build. Why? Because of the mantra Spark Swap. This ability let Always AFK swap positions with any mob within a certain radius, including his own lightning clones that he could place anywhere. This meant that Always AFK could now swap with the carbuncles next to this tent at the very start to get to the key faster, and he could put down a clone before the Bonekeeper fight to quickly swap across the gap back towards Chaser. This, in combination with the 4-cycle Chaser kill, due to using some extra damage modifiers, allowed him, on April 29th, to obtain a world record Chaser run of 5 minutes and 15 seconds on his way to Etheron. Using the same new build, a player named Baby was able to lower the time by 10 seconds on May 15th, by utilizing cleaner movement and by being the first to implement wave dashing into their runs for this long section here. What is a wave dash? Well, it's a unique movement tech that utilizes the talent Cap Artist and the mantra Heavenly Wind. By using Cap Artist to ragdoll yourself at the peak of your teleport from Heavenly Wind, you can fling yourself with a lot of speed in whatever direction you aim at, as long as you don't have any obstructions on the ground path you take. Always AFK first implemented this technique in the long corridor on floor 2 to great effect, but it didn't seem very viable to use anywhere on the first floor until Baby's run. Wave dashing gets its name from the similar looking movement tech in high-level Super Smash Bros. Melee games. On May 23rd, Always AFK started making attempts for the world record with a couple of new strategies. The first difference was that he broke the door with Lightning Beam instead of Shoulder Bash, freeing up mantra space for the new wind mobility mantra, Wind Passage, that was recently released. Also, remember how Spark Swap was only minorly useful at the start of the run? Well, in this run, Always AFK found 2 more uses for it. By standing on this platform here and swapping with the Bonekeeper will fall directly into the void and dies almost instantly, allowing him to bypass the fight entirely. This was a huge discovery. Not only was it significantly faster than fighting the Bonekeeper normally, but it also removed the need to farm for a high damage versus monsters armor set to stay competitive, which significantly lowered the barrier of entry to Chaser speedrunning. Unfortunately, it takes a bit for the barrier to despawn, so instead of waiting, he jumps around it using his exceptional mobility. After that, he uses his wave dash in the same spot as Baby did, but once he is out of bounds, he does another Spark Swap to bypass the roundabout route it takes to get around the many invisible ragdoll walls in the out of bounds section. Also, remember when we said that the Evan Spear Hand Axe was the most powerful weapon in the game? That wasn't exactly the full truth. There is a much stronger weapon, but the price to use it was generally not considered worth the risk before this run. By obtaining the Crazy Slots Resonance, the player can roll for about a 1 out of 6 chance to get the Divine Great Axe, objectively the strongest weapon in the game. And while this did allow Always AFK to get a 3-cycle Chaser, the additional RNG made grinding for a world record past this point a lot more tedious. Regardless, all these new time saves allowed him to get away with a solid 4:38 run, easily breaking the sub 5 minute barrier. For a bit of time, there was debate whether Gale or Frost was faster for speedrunning. Gale had more overall mobility buffs, with Gale leaps and double jumps, and potential bursts of speed in small sections with wave dashing. But Ice Skates and Glacial Arc with Ice Lance gave unrivaled vertical mobility, and extremely versatile, albeit slow, horizontal mobility. However, it didn't take long for a clear winner to be established. On July 10th, Always AFK improved his time by discovering a new way to wave dash. By using it near the edge of a cliff, Your momentum could be carried through the air to travel immense distances incredibly fast. This discovery was huge. Always AFK also found a couple more spots on the map that interacted strangely with Gale Lunge, giving him extra height in certain areas, which allowed him to save even more time. Overall, it was an incredible run, ending with a time of 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In the description of his submission, Always AFK said that a sub 4 minute run would be almost impossible, and that you need a perfect run in almost every way to get it. By this point, it was clear that Always AFK was the king of chaser speedrunning. Occasionally, challengers would come and dethrone him, but he always came back harder and faster than before, constantly pushing the barrier with new techniques, strategies, and routes. But a new challenger was about to approach, one that could finally contend with Always AFK. His name? Danny Crest.
Act 3. Danny Crest, the challenger.
On June 18th, a player known as Danny Crest submitted a chaser run 3 seconds faster than Always AFK's. His secret? While Always AFK used Gale leaps to get across this gap here, Danny Crest realized he could save much more time by simply wave dashing across this gap. It may seem small, but this is enough of a time save for him to steal the world record from Always AFK. With wave dashing giving insane potential, and two speedrunners willing to compete and lower the time even further together, it seemed like a sub 4 minute chaser run was all but inevitable given enough time. Unfortunately, the developers had other plans. The very next day, on June 19th, Deepwoken had another weekly update. It seemed like a normal update, except for a very minor change. Most players didn't even notice it, but for the speedrunners, it was a devastating change. By reducing the range modifier of Heavenly Wind, it meant that the distance that the mantra could take the player was cut in half. This absolutely gutted wave dashes, making them almost useless. And although developers have unpatched speedrunning tech in the past, like Bounder Skip, this time was different. Cries to unpatch this bug were met with radio silence. Just as things were about to get interesting, it seemed like the age of chaser speedruns was truly over this time. Every world record run that had used wave dashing was now unbeatable, and all that speedrunners could do was wait. But on August 7th, over a month and a half later, it was time. After a conversation with the developers, Always AFK was finally able to convince them to unpatch wave dashing so that it worked exclusively in Layer 2. Not only this, but a new mechanic was added to the game, known as Chain of Perfection. For once, an update was released that helped speedrunners rather than nerfing them. The Chain of Perfection mechanic rewards players for flawlessing enemies, giving an extremely powerful damage buff after successive hits without taking any damage. The damage buff can reach up to 2 times damage. Needless to say, speedrunners were back, and it only took 1 day for Danny Crest to shatter the 4 minute barrier with ease. With a solid run, and thanks to Chain of Perfection resulting in a 2-cycle chaser kill, Danny Crest improved his record to a 3 minute and 38 second run on August 8th. Pretty good, but Always AFK wasn't going to let him keep the world record for much longer. You see, all the speedrunning tech that Always AFK had developed over the last month and a half have been waiting for this moment. He found a new place at the start to sneak in a wave dash at the start of the run, and made use of the mantra Glacial Arc with Gale Lunge rather than Ice Lance to gain insane vertical height and skip the climb up to the Bonekeeper. On the third wave dash, he used his double jump to prevent fall damage, and then after swapping with the Bonekeeper, he used Glacial Arc again to fly directly up to Chaser instead of slowly climbing the wall. Not only did this new build make use of Frost Draw in addition to Gale Breath and Thunder Call, but he also made use of Flame Charm to help with Chaser. There's a talent that allowed AFK to call a Lightning Strike down on the 4th hit of his M1 cycle, which he could buffer by hitting the air first. This stunned Chaser and allowed him to get 4 hits in before the fight even started. This, in combination with playing perfectly to keep up Chain of Perfection, allowed Always AFK to do this. You saw that correctly. Always AFK manually executed Chaser, rather than waiting for his slow death animation to play out. This technique of executing Chaser had been seen before, but it was thought to be impossible in solo runs, and no one was able to consistently recreate it. So how did Always AFK figure this out? Chaser has 25,000 HP. When he loses 20,000 HP, he enters his final state, where he slams into the floor until it breaks and he dies. This takes a bit though, and players just have to sit and wait for him to finish, losing a lot of time. However, if you are able to deal enough damage with Chain of Perfection and other talents like Ardor Scream, Inhale, and Aftercut, etc., you can take him down all the way to 0 HP. But this alone isn't enough. He doesn't get knocked simply from being on 0 HP. After studying multiple clips of Chaser being executed by players, Always AFK noticed something that they all shared in common. Chaser was always set on fire before he was gripped. So by taking the talent Flaming Flourish, Always AFK is able to light Chaser on fire on his final hit, after which he is knocked, and can be executed manually to skip his death animation. This is known as the 2-cycle Chaser grip. So, with all of that, Always AFK's retimed run clocked in at an impressive 2 minutes, 59 seconds, and 830 milliseconds, just barely breaking the 3-minute barrier. Impressive, but Danny had one more trick up his sleeve. On August 23rd, Danny submitted another speedrun. This one had roughly the same new route and build as Always AFK, but rather than going directly to Chaser, Danny took a detour to kill a Bonekeeper on the way. This gave him extra Chain of Perfection stacks that he wouldn't have otherwise if he had went to Chaser directly. This meant that he began the fight with the full 2x damage buff from having maximum chain stacks. His new build also had Lightning Cloak, which increases attack speed, allowing him to get a couple of extra hits off during Chaser's vulnerable state, letting Danny Crest pull this off.
Wait, did I do it?
Danny had done what was once considered impossible, a 1-cycle Chaser grip. He had done 25,000 damage in the first half and 1 full cycle, more than making up for lost time by detouring to the Bonekeeper. And with that, he ended the timer at a solid 2 minutes and 54 seconds. It would be a difficult run to beat. But just 12 days later, Always AFK had done it. With cleaner movement and by rolling crazy slots near the detour Bonekeeper to increase the odds of getting a Great Axe, Always AFK was able to take back the record by just 4 seconds on August 30th, with a 2 minute and 50 second run. An impressive run, but there were still some small mistakes that could be ironed out, and Danny was ready to spin back with a faster run once more. He would have at least, but the developers decided to change things up once again.
Act 4. Return to the Dark Ages.
On September 13th, an update was released that fixed a long-standing issue of Chaser's jars being breakable by certain mantras, essentially soft-locking the player. Unfortunately, this had the side effect of making every object in Layer 2 unbreakable, including the door that speedrunners broke through at the start of every run. This meant that Always AFK's run was essentially unbeatable, since breaking the door saved nearly 8 seconds. Not only this, but Spark Swap was changed to scale with HP. This meant that when below about 75% HP, the swap to the second Bonekeeper wouldn't work anymore, meaning that even if runners could get through the door, fall damage suddenly became much more of an issue. Luckily, the first problem was quickly solved by the discovery of a new clip. By jumping at the same time as using Wind Passage, runners could teleport through very thick walls. This also saved runners a mantra slot, because they no longer needed Lightning Beam to break through the door. So, problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. Before Danny could take back the record with this new tech, another update was released, and it seemed like speedrunners couldn't come back from this one. Remember how the strongest enchantment in the game was the Chilling enchant? That's kind of a random enchant to be the strongest, right? Well, it turns out that this was actually unintentional. You see, enemy HP scales differently from player HP. Players get a damage buff against NPCs based on their own level, getting a maximum damage at power 20. For some reason, the Chilling enchant applied this damage buff twice over, meaning that damage was scaled exponentially. It's no wonder why speedrunners were able to 1-cycle grip Chaser with this knowledge. But when the developers discovered this, it didn't take them long to patch it out. And on September 29th, they fixed it, returning the Chilling enchant to the same level as the other PvE enchants. With this change, even the new strongest PvE enchant, Astral, could only result in a 2-cycle Chaser. All hope seemed lost. Runners couldn't even deal enough damage for Chaser to be executed anymore. Or could they?
Remember when Logan said that only 2 oaths were useful for speedrunning, which were Jet Striker and Star Kindred? Well, this wasn't exactly true. There was a third oath, one that was way better than the others, and that was Arc Warder. This oath was a dual attunement oath, and due to a bug at the time, the PvE scaling would happen twice, and at an exponential rate. Basically, it was doing about 10 times more damage than it should have been. And, of course, the developers found this out around the time I was doing the speedrun and were going to patch it very, very soon. So there wasn't really much of a window to take back the world record. Knowing this though, I quickly threw together a new build, and in addition to a new time save by using Glacial Gale Lunge to jump over this mountain, and a few other things like Astral, which sucked, and also a surge path bug, which made me do a lot more damage when I used Overcharge. The fact that Arc Beam did so much damage pretty much made Crazy Slots obsolete. I didn't have to deal with that 1 in 6 chance anymore at the end, which ruined so many great runs. And because of this, on one fateful day when me and Always AFK were in VC, I happened to pull off one of the greatest runs of all time, 2 minutes and 47 seconds, and that was the world record. And it was just in time too, because guess what? That very same day, about 30 minutes after I uploaded my speedrun, the devs patched the double scaling for Arc Beam, meaning it was not possible to do that run ever again. So yeah, that's the Chaser world record story. That's how we left the world record at 2 minutes and 47
Never needed
seconds.
to do a layer 2 ever
No need
again.
for anything
And
else.
finally,
Definitely,
no one else
definitely didn't do any more testing.
Definitely.
So there we have it. Danny Crest had solidified himself as the new king of Chaser speedrunning, with an unbeatable run. It really seemed like the end of Chaser speedrunning this time. The damage players could deal was absolutely gutted. Even with the help of some buffs increasing mantra damage and self-damage buffs no longer removing Chain of Perfection stacks, it didn't matter. Always AFK and Danny had all but given up on lowering the time further, and the developers seemed to have no intention of unpatching this bug, considering that it affected all players, not just speedrunners. Was this how it all ended? Stuck with an unbeatable world record, caused by their own hubris. Their own naivety led to this situation, constantly pushing the boundaries with risky, soon-to-be-patched exploits. They flew too close to the sun, and lost forever what they cherished most. Alright, listen. Let's not jump too far ahead.
Act 5. He who cometh from the six.
Even though Always AFK and Danny had lost hope, there was a third player, slowly climbing up the leaderboard and showing off some promising skills. Nebrilla DM seemed to arrive too late to the speedrunning scene to make a difference. Yet for whatever reason, he seemed adamant on finding a new way to one-cycle grip Chaser. However, this seemingly pointless endeavor inspired Danny Crest. They realized that if they wanted a chance of breaking the world record again, they would all need to work together. So all three of them formed a group chat. I was also in this group chat, with the express purpose of finding a way to get the world record. One last-ditch effort to find a way to one-cycle grip Chaser again. Eventually, Danny Crest unearthed an ancient clip of an exploiter insta-killing Chaser with Flame Grab, with external cheating software. It gave Danny an idea. What if he could find a way to teleport Chaser outside of the arena and into the void with Jolt Grab and the Run It Back Resonance, which teleports the player back to a checkpoint after a specific time frame? Would that even work? Could he even be taken out of the arena? Does the void even work like that? The void was effective at killing the Bonekeeper, but maybe bosses were different. Testing proved futile. Danny was unable to pull it off. That is, until DM sent this image on November 12th. The strategy worked. DM was able to drag Chaser out of the arena by using Jolt Grab at the same time Run It Back returned him to his original position. But how far could he go? The next day, Danny Crest was able to use this strategy to almost get him into the void. It didn't seem very consistent. A bit strange. Other clips showed Chaser getting flung downwards into the void after a grab, but it didn't seem to kill him. He would only get bugged into the wall. It almost seemed like a lost cause, until, in a VC together with Danny, DM hit this clip.
Did you do it? Okay.
Try go back and see if Chaser got like TP back.
Oh, we killed him! Oh, it worked!
What?
So how did this work? Well, it turns out that Jolt Grab was only one piece of the puzzle. Similar to the Chaser grip tech, Chaser needed to be on fire as well in order to die to the void. The working theory is that Chaser falling into the void takes his HP to 0, but he needs to be on fire so that he burns to death when he gets down there. And although I used Jolt Grab in the original clip, since I fat-fingered Flame Leap afterwards, Chaser was set on fire and I accidentally discovered the secret that made the tech possible. Thankfully, Flame Grab does the exact same thing plus lighting Chaser on fire, but since you only have a few frames to pull Chaser with you through the Run It Back, we designed a macro in order to make it more consistent.
Thus began a new age of Chaser speedruns. Long gone were the days of rolling for Crazy Slots RNG and DPS builds. Always AFK came up with a new build that focused on pure mobility, with the Shadow Hero Blade instead of the Petra's Anchor, bringing the attunement count up to 5. But it didn't matter how difficult the build was to make, everyone wanted to make their mark on history before the tech was patched by the developers. And so, it began. The great speedrunning era.
Now I was raised in a sandbox, next to you and her. You was holding a handgun, she was giving birth to a baby born to be just like you. I wonder what's that's worth. I wonder if you ever knew you was a role model to me first. The next day I woke up in the morning, seen you on the news, looked in the mirror and realized that I had something to prove. You told me, don't be like me, just finish watching cartoons. Which is funny now, cause all I see is Wile E. Coyotes in the room. And I run it, and I run it, and I run it, and ironic. Ironic.
Wow. In the course of just a couple days since the discovery of the Chaser Instakill, informally known as the Chaser Slam Dunk, the world record had improved by an entire minute. Nobody thought this would ever be possible.
Forget Brock?
That's gotta be it. That's gotta be it. Come on.
Come on. Come on. Yes! Yes! I did it!
We're Brock!
Oh my god. Ain't no
It's
way.
not Jover. It's not
What?
Jover.
He just
New
got
world
over.
record.
Pinging to Arch right
No,
now.
no, no, don't tell him.
Oh,
no,
no,
No, I'm telling him. I'm telling him.
Don't tell
I
him.
don't care.
No way.
way, dude. It's that easy.
Of course, with all the new discoveries, progress began to slow down. It took Danny a week from that long burst of world record runs to get back on the leaderboard. He had optimized every new strategy, including the Shadow Hero Blade Wave Dash, and all the previous strategies and optimal routes taken in other recent runs. That, in combination with near perfect gameplay, landed him a solid sub 140 run, and with it, earning himself a well-deserved break from Layer 2 speedrunning. Always AFK was continuing to grind out runs, but after nearly 2,000 attempts, the best he could do was a 142 on November 29th. The run was starting to become extremely tedious, Chaser rarely granting a kill, with most potential world record runs ending due to the seemingly random nature of the slam dunk. Meanwhile, DM continued running. Eventually, he took the world record back by just 1 second after extending his third wave dash to save time at the expense of fall damage, and then improving upon it again 6 days later, with a run that by all accounts seemed unbeatable, having incredible wave dashes and an incredibly fast final split, despite a small rubber band due to lag. It wasn't a perfect run though. While DM had consistent successful runs, he took a safer route for the very start of the run. Always AFK was willing to save a lot more time by going for riskier gale leaps and using a new time save that involved interacting with the door within a short time window after using wind passes and jumping to clip through it during the dialogue, which was much faster than simply interacting with the door and clipping through after exiting the dialogue. This saved over 2 seconds approaching the door, and on a good run, nearly 4 seconds at the end of the first split. Unfortunately, opting for a riskier start meant it took Always AFK even more attempts, most runs not even making it to the first split before it was already a lost cause. And while Jet Striker was very consistent, Star Kindred was objectively faster. However, it was difficult to find places in the run to activate the wings that buff air dashes without losing time. Star Kindred wings only last for about 65 seconds, meaning that he needed to move at faster than world record pace or else he'd have to use Sinister Halo to refresh the wings, meaning that he wouldn't be able to make the air dash required to reach the Bounder spawn trigger. And after thousands of attempts, many that would have been world record if not for the slam dunk, he began to wonder if it had even been possible. Maybe the developers shadow patched the Chaser slam dunk. It wasn't looking good for the speedrunners. Then, on December 9th, Always AFK had this run. He has a 3.5 second lead after the final spark swap. All he needs to do is get lucky with Chaser. Finally, on his 4,293rd attempt, he had gotten a 1 minute and 32 second run. He had world record once more. But was it worth it? Clearly, it took its toll on Always AFK. You don't spend that much time in Layer 2 without leaving a part of yourself there when you hook back out. Always AFK made it clear that this would be his last speedrun. He had become satisfied. It really seemed like no one was going to be able to beat it without grinding for potentially tens of thousands of attempts, or the discovery of some new, absurdly broken mobility tech. And so, that's where the record stood.
Act 6. The discovery of some absurdly broken mobility tech.
On December 11th, Always AFK got a DM from a user named Max Trinio, who had discovered an interesting interaction between Run It Back and Wind Passage. Yeah. Turns out that the distance you travel with Run It Back gets added to your Wind Passage distance if you use it at the same time as it expires. Why? We have no idea. But it lets you clip through entire walls and mountains with relative ease. Since Max Trinio discovered the tech, he was given the honor of naming it length maxing, and it didn't take long for speedrunners to find a new route with this. In addition to this, Danny Crest also discovered a new way to fling herself forward without wave dashing by using a glacial arc at a specific angle and flame leaping. This is useful because you cannot ragdoll yourself during Run It Back, meaning that this is a viable wave dashing alternative to maximize the distance gained from length maxing. So not only was Danny Crest able to fit 2 massive length maxes to his route, But a side effect of this was that it was so fast that it made wave dashing obsolete. The strongest movement tech ever discovered became useless thanks to length maxing. Wow. And on top of that, remember how Danny said that there was actually a third oath which was useful for speedrunning, which was arc water when its scaling was broken? Well, there's a fourth oath that happens to be useful too. By using Vision Shaper's illusory counter, you can counter a falling spike. And since it can't teleport you behind the enemy, it teleports you to the very center of the map, which happens to be the perfect place in Layer 2 for the speedrun. And almost an entire month after Always AFK's final world record on January 9th, Danny Crest would get a run with a time of 1 minute and 26 seconds with the help of length maxing and the Vision Shaper teleport. Now, if you watched yesterday's video, the end of Always AFK, you'd know that just 3 days later, on January 12th, Always AFK left the internet entirely. But before he left the internet, he stated that a sub 125 run was the ultimate end goal, and that whoever got it first would be the greatest chaser speedrunner of all time. Now, all Danny had to do was grind out the runs. Of course, DM wasn't going to make it easy. Now that Always AFK was gone, it was a race between them on who could kill the game first, because that's gotta be the last improvement. I actually don't see how it could even be possible to get faster than this. It's getting ridiculous. Music compilation probably IDK. And that's where AFK ended the script, so I'm gonna be writing the next part. This speedrun Always AFK wouldn't end up seeing, since he's completely disconnected from the internet. But it was up to Danny and DM to get the sub 125 run in honor of Always AFK. But 1 week later on January 19th, the devs just had to go and interfere with speedrunning once again. The update made it so you would automatically unequip weapons that you no longer meet the requirements for after using the Shrine of Order. This meant that the modern speedrunning build, which was using the 75 requirement Shadow Hero Blade with only 17 Shadowcast, wasn't possible to make anymore. Now, this wouldn't affect any current builds, but it did mean that the speedrunning build was now unobtainable. This meant that anyone who wanted to challenge Danny or DM couldn't, as their builds were no longer creatable. And if Danny or DM had wipes, they would be out of the race for sub 125 for good. But Danny and DM pushed forward, and on the very same day that their builds became unobtainable, DM set the first and final sub 125 with a time of 124. This run is absolutely incredible, with near perfect movement at all times, as well as amazing execution of all of the speedrunning techs that have been developed up until this point. DM truly had the biggest feat in Deepwoken. At this point, the category had been declared as dead, and as AFK said, I actually don't see how it could even be possible to get faster than this. It's getting ridiculous.
Act 7. The future of chaser speedruns.
And this actually is where the record stands, and what the glitched chaser percent category looks like today. After DM's run, the chaser percent category got split into a glitchless category, which includes the slam dunk chaser kill, and a normal glitchless category, which I might cover in a future video. While a sub 120 might be theoretically possible, it's incredibly unlikely that anyone will even attempt to pull off a run of this magnitude in the future. But as we've seen time and time again, it's completely possible for someone to pull off an incredible run out of nowhere with undiscovered techs or new additions to the game. So what happened to the big three of chaser speedruns after the race was over and the category was considered dead? As we've covered already, Always AFK completely left the internet, while Danny Crest separated himself from the Deepwoken community completely, only keeping in contact with a few people that he became close with. However, Nebula DM wasn't as burnt out as AFK or Danny from Deepwoken, and began speedrunning the glitchless chaser percent category, and even did a duo speedrun with me, where we temporarily held the world record. Deepwoken truly has a speedrunning history like no other. After fighting against the game, the developers, and each other, they've beaten the odds to push this Roblox game to its absolute limit. Let's take a look at just how many factors needed to line up in order to create such an incredible speedrun history. First, Deepwoken Layer 2 being a dungeon, and not an open world server like Layer 1 was, making the player actually do damage to Chaser, which allowed players to kill him much quicker. The diverse amount of mobility monsters and techs that were pushed to their absolute limit, like Glacial Arc Gale Lunge, Ice Skates, Spark Swap, Wind Passage, and of course Wave Dashing, just to name a few. If Toop didn't send Always AFK the original Wave Dash clip, it's unlikely that Wave Dashing would have ever been used, which also means that the Shadow Hero Blade Wave Dash most likely would have never been invented, as there's no other reason to pick the Cap Artist talent. The addition of Chain of Perfection and how you could kill the Detour Bonekeeper to start the Chaser fight with max Chain of Perfection stacks, the fact that both the Chilling Enchant and the Arc Water Oath had broken damage scaling for so much time, allowing players to do more damage than they should have been able to do in the first place, resulting in things like the one cycle Chaser grip. And then after they patched that, Danny Crest seeing the clip of the exploiter insta-killing Chaser at the same time that DM began running the game, which inspired the search for the Chaser insta-kill. But don't forget, if DM didn't fat finger flame leap after Jolt grabbing Chaser, Chaser wouldn't have died, and the 0 cycle grip would have never even happened. And if Max Trinio didn't discover length maxing by, I don't know, when passaging into a wall on the same frame that his run it back expired, which I have no idea how he figured that one out, then the sub 125 would have never occurred. And of course, all of the incredible runners who dedicated so much of their time to figuring out these techs and mastering them in order to complete the layer 2 dungeon as fast as humanly possible. After all, you can't have a speed game if you don't have dedicated runners who are willing to put in the effort to break barriers. All of these factors made for such an incredible speedrun history, and I'm very thankful that I got the opportunity to witness it, as well as the honor of creating this documentary, which serves as Always AFK's final video. I hope that by the time Always AFK comes back to the internet, he'll really enjoy this video and tell me that I did it justice. Of course, it wouldn't have been possible for me to make this documentary in the first place without him, as he wrote most of the script which he left to me, and it was my job to put the puzzle pieces together while creating this video, which I very much enjoyed. Honestly, I think that Always AFK should get some kind of reference in Deepwoken, whether it's a statue referencing Purge Week, or even just a character that has similar hair to him. It would be cool to see him immortalized in a game upon which he's had so much influence. And to you, the viewer, if you made it to the end of this 40+ minute long video, I greatly appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed watching it just as much as I enjoyed creating it, and that you'll stick around here for more content that I make in the future. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.